Look at that beautiful bridge. All right. Here we are on YouTube with Bruce Rawles and Lynn Johnson, and we're reading the book Absence from Felicity um, by Kenneth Wapnick, PhD. It's the story of Helen Schuckman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles. And I was just looking this morning, Bruce. I'm pretty excited to say that we are 69% through the book. Oh,
Oh, almost
yeah,
70%. It's
almost
only taken us a
70.
year and a half.
We're like
We're just
moving along.
herd of turtles stampeding through Ken's brilliant biography.
I know it. It's lovely, but every time it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I've read this, and I'll talk about this all the time. We read this book, years ago, and
Yeah, about a
man,
decade plus for me, I think now.
yeah, and I'm just shocked, really, at how much I didn't know.
Well, I think Ken always, packs a ton of insight into even the most mundane accounts of various historical data, which, like we were saying and have been saying pretty much every week for a year and a half. It's like first pass through. Wow, what a great biography about the lady who scribed the course. And now it's like, wow, what a great testimony to the importance of compassion for ourselves and everyone, because we're all of a split mind, like Helen demonstrated with her brilliance of being able to very clearly bring through Holy Spirit's message when she was in her right mind, and her tremendous resistance when she was fighting implementing it. And I think that's, I can't think of too many course students that don't fall into that category, and I'm certainly in there. And I think it's just, a great idea and a reminder to, as we're reading it, to just say, wow, this is everyone's story. We're all fighting the same hard battle.
Exactly. And you may think, which I've, done many times, well, I don't really have a lot of resistance to it. I'm wholeheartedly believing this and I'm wholeheartedly doing this. And then you get to something like today's lesson, God is the love in which I forgive, and he asks you to, take 5 minutes and bring up all the people that you have grievances or unforgivenesses for. And
Mhm.
and I was shocked at myself doing the practice for 5 minutes, shocked at how much uh, I have been resisting forgiveness on so many levels and so many people for so many years. I mean,
Sure.
I was bringing up people that 20 years ago. The guy that fired me from my job. I mean,
Yeah, and everything, is a perfect classroom, whether it's a current event or a past memory from, 10 seconds ago or 10 years ago or 60 years ago. It doesn't really matter, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're not forgiving it, then it's living in your world and coloring it a way different color than what it
Mhm.
should really be. And so that's, it's such a beautiful thing to have these constant daily reminders.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
the resistance, which we started talking about, the resistance to it, is what, makes me forget to say, to forgive or to do the lesson. Or, I know we're supposed to do that 3 times today, and in between as many times as we can or possible when things come up, whatever. And I can it's amazing to me the ones that were so heavy before that I just thought I could never ever ever let go of, never ever ever forgive. Now it's just like, yeah, okay, that's kind of funny, that's silly, you know.
Uh-huh. Well, and I think it's a gradual process of slowly but surely, you know, testing the strength and the validity and really that's part of the development of trust in the Holy Spirit's curriculum of undoing our belief in separation and realizing that the results of that is more and more consistent peace and the erosion of ego's actual performance of more and more consistent angst and fear and guilt and that whole sin, guilt, fear, death, division, duality package that has never served us. But we we need to see that on usually a gradual basis. And I think the course spells it out pretty clearly that, if we were to just suddenly pull the curtain back, and all at once, we'd probably be plunged more deeply into fear, um, because our identity would be shifting in such a dramatic fashion from being, a um, total toddler, basically, spiritually, to
Me?
to well, yeah, yeah, we're all in that same boat, so we all think, like Ken says, Wapnick says, when you go to the slog to the bathroom mirror in the morning and identify with what seems to be reflected there, okay, I still got work to do.
Yeah,
Instead of
yeah,
seeing that as a puppet or a dream figure, that's just a not something to laugh at derisively, but to just gently giggle at and say, "Oh yeah, I I'm learning to not see this as a big deal, and everything
yeah.
that's associated with that person's story."
Which is, oh man, what a relief that is.
Yeah, fizz, fizz, plop, plop, right?
Is right. So let's take a look at our book. Where I marked us last week, I think we already read. I marked us that we were here, but I remember reading um, this discussion, unless I just read it anyways, about the
I
the cave.
think we're a little ahead of that. I've got us at Helen and Bill and I later were discussing. So there we go.
There we go. That's what
Yeah,
I thought.
yeah.
So I just put the mark in the wrong place. So,
That's okay. Yeah, it's all
well,
good.
yeah, I just
It never hurts to back up and get a running start to get the context too, in which we've done a lot of times. Yeah, so,
yeah. So
yeah.
that's
In this case, I think we can probably jump in where we left off.
yeah.
Uh, um, do you want to go for that?
Sure. And for those who are just joining us for maybe for the first time, we're actually Helen, Bill, and Ken, and also Bill's friend, was it Chip that went with him?
I,
Anyway, they
yeah.
went to Israel. And so they are looking through the caves. If you had known earlier in the story, Helen had visions of being in a cave, and so they're kind of trying to resolve that vision that she had,
Hmm.
figure out where the heck it was and what was there um, uh, that was so significant. So they actually go to Israel. First, Ken went to Israel and went digging around through the caves, and now Helen and Bill and their friend have come to Israel again also, and so now they are looking at the caves as well. So,
Right.
so do you want me to read?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
all right. So, Helen, Bill, and I, and this is Ken writing, Helen, Bill, and I later were discussing this rather emotional morning when it occurred to all of us that it was this cave at Qumran and what it represented for Helen that was the true object of what had so preoccupied us during the summer. That preoccupation had been displaced to the cave at the monastery. Similar to Helen's and Bill's experience with the Mayo Clinic, we had not only had the content wrong, but the form as well. On another level, I think Bill's feelings about a scroll buried in a cylinder were displaced from the Qumran cave to the one on Mount Natofa. Helen's thoughts about a chalice, such as a holy symbol in Christianity, the Arthurian legends, as well as in the Course of Miracles, where, as we have seen, it is identified with the atonement, were likewise displaced from her experience at Qumran, quote, the holiest place on earth, unquote. As for me, I still feel there is something of value in the cave, but perhaps it was only of personal meaning, a meaning which was more than fulfilling by my experience in finding the ring. Of the chalice, scroll, or whatever is or is not buried there, we shall never know. The interior to the cave is sealed, and so it seems it should be. Let the dead bury the dead, as it were. The past, the form is over. The content of love remains.
Hmm.
Wow. What, well, that's such a powerful message too. And
The tiny matter idea was over long ago, as the Course reminds us, which is again one of those challenging ideas that I think we gradually accept a little at a time, because to really totally grok that completely and to live as if that was the truth, that would be a shift, a little too dramatic change for most of us. So we come at it, from different angles, and sort of like eroding, um, it's like shining maybe another metaphor would be, it's like we still think there's a giant monster under the bed, but if we shine a little tiny flashlight at different angles, each time you know shine it, we see, well, there's nothing there. Maybe we still maybe think there's something there, but
there still might be something there. It might
we have to kind of keep at it until we convince ourselves through repeated illuminations that this, like, well, there really isn't any monster under the bed. There's really this whole sin. Not only is everything that the ego has projected onto the world of space-time a tremendous misinterpretation, but the whole thought system was made up too.
exactly, exactly. In fact, there is no bed. No, no
Right.
spoon, no nothing
Yep.
to
Humpty Dumpty didn't fall. There wasn't a wall. There wasn't a
yeah.
Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah. And just remembering that whether or not, your mind can fathom it and you really want to believe it, um, just keeping the idea open that, yeah, this is really not happening and never has been. And even reading these stories, Ken and Bill and Helen were so convinced that, that there was something to be found in the past, and
Mhm.
they're running around going to different places looking for items or something of significance, because in their minds it had to have been real, when in reality, um, none of it ever happened. So this is all just their connection to a story,
Mhm.
maybe all connected to the same story at the same place, but it's it was not real, and this is not real.
Mhm.
And
No one ever was in a body. So birth and death are really just misunderstandings. And maybe their, if you will, karmic path or classroom, whatever you want to call it, was to conclude episodes in what we would think of as past lives in that area. But I'm just conjecturing. This is
mhm, yeah,
totally my
because we don't know.
speculation. It's like, maybe that was their way of um, finalizing their remaining desire to do level confusion around that story, so that they could then proceed to work on what the current and eternal message is that Jesus was bringing forth, which is
Yeah,
really just, again, a symbol of a part of our mind that is ego free, and any label would work. It could be Buddha, it could be Mary Magdalene, it could be
yeah,
Nisargadatta or Ramana Maharshi or Muji, or whoever seems to represent an ego-free presence in our mind. It doesn't really matter the name or the association. It's really just, as long as the uh, connection is one that says, the separation doesn't have any validity, nor did it ever, nor
right,
will it ever.
exactly. And if you can perceive it, then you must be it too.
Hmm.
If you can see it, you have it too. You can look and say, "Oh, I think this person is ego free," or I believe that this person is, is the Holy Christ." Well, if I can see it, it's only because I am it as well. This is it. These are all projections of my own thinking. So, it's really an important thing to remember that there are no special others that are that have something that we don't have, that and in fact, Jesus tells us, I have faith in you that you will remember that you were just like me,
Hmm.
because you're just like me, and you may not believe it, but I'm willing to be here and wait until you do believe it, until you do remember this. So, this is, if Jesus has faith in us that, we we are that and will be that, will recognize that at some point, then we can have faith in each other for that as well. And I think that's at this time, in the way the world seems to be, it's really, really important for me to keep remembering that these are the Christ, the representatives of the truth. And
Hmm.
just because they appear to be operating in a manner that I don't really understand, that doesn't change the fact of what they are. And I have faith that they will remember, just like I will remember, the truth of what we are. Faith is not unfounded in this world, but don't have faith that the world is going to change or things are going to get better. Have faith that your brother's going to remember the Christ, and that you will too. Anyway, so I guess.
As you're saying that, I was thinking that the real superpower that Jesus has and represents and is trying to impart to us and restore to our awareness, really, that we think we've lost, is not only forgiveness but everything that goes with it. One attribute being patience, which is one of the 12 qualities in the development of trust. And I think, if he has, he, symbol in our mind, has infinite patience, then that's something that we're encouraged to restore, develop. I think develop sometimes is a misnomer because it's already there, but to restore that capacity for being completely patient with ourselves and everyone,
Yeah,
and just notice when we're not patient, and then that becomes our classroom with anyone or
absolutely.
anything.
Absolutely. And infinite patience brings immediate results.
Wink, twang,
Which
magic wand.
means it's
Well,
already
it's
done.
a miracle wand rather than a magic wand.
Yeah.
Right?
Bing. Mickey, one of the people in our group, has a phone thing that goes bling like a magic wand, and she'll say something and it'll go off and it'll be like, oh,
Cool.
there's your Holy Spirit fairy.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. So let's see, look at where we're at. All in all, therefore, um, the experience was an exercise of faith, having trust. Oh, here we go, with no concern for the outcome.
Hmm.
As if nothing else, the cave episode had bonded Helen, Bill, and me ever more closely.
The real discovery, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Regardless of what artifacts might have been found in a cave in the Middle East, right? Or caves.
Yeah, the real artifact was the sonship, the brotherhood of these three, and that's so essential to the continuation of this course. And the course had just been newly birthed. It was
Hmm.
hadn't even been published yet, at this point, I don't believe. So in fact, I don't remember that we'd read that part yet. So yeah, there's a lot going on here that needs to be gelled together to make this trio work. And someone said the other day, was shocked actually, um, that Bill and Ken didn't like each other, and that they had bad blood between them or something. It shocked me to hear a thing like that, because I really had no recollection of ever having read anything about that. But they said that he talked about it in absence of Felicity. So I have to. We'll look for that, and maybe you know something of it. But as far as I know, I don't think Bill and Ken had. They may have rubbed each other the wrong way occasionally. That does happen, when humans are together. But in reality, as a team, I think that they were they had a true love for each other.
Well, I
So
think the way to generalize that to everyone is, as Ken Wapnick points out, the sameness, the foundation of the sameness that gives us the ability to forgive ourselves and therefore extend it to everyone that seems to be outside of us is we have the same three-part mind. We have the ego, we have the Holy Spirit, and we have the decision maker, which is basically like a switch that is constantly toggling back and forth between those two thought systems. And everyone has those three parts of their mind in our seemingly split minds. And of course, that never really happened in truth, but where we think we are, that seems to be the case in pretty much every moment. So to say that, a person is ego free, well, first of all, person is sort of an oxymoron because it imply, ego free person is an oxymoron because it implies that
It couldn't
that
exist.
something that's separate can have uh that believes it's separate can can no longer believe in separation. Well, the whole premise of the ego is that the separation happened, and therefore the sin, guilt, fear, defense, attack, craziness is intrinsic to that thought system. But I think, every ego hates every other ego because that's just what egos do. That's their foundation is, what's not love is murder. And that the true self of everyone, conversely, is completely accepting and resonating with the innocence and the total, unconditional acceptance of the perfection of every other seemingly separate self because of the recognition on some level that the separation never happened. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And it's just something that as you were speaking, you made me think of
I
water.
made you.
Yes, you did. You made me think. You,
Was
you
there
brought
coercion there?
you brought
Sorry.
to mind. I guess you didn't make it, but you
Okay.
brought to mind the water. And I know you know enough of chemistry and physics to know that water is not just a molecule of H and then two oxygens, a hydrogen and two oxygens. That's not what it is. The they there is no single water molecule. It doesn't exist. The they the oxygens flip back and forth between the hydrogen. They dance around, but they don't actually land and be one whole thing. It's you can't have one single molecule of water. It's all a movement. Uh, I don't know if you can have single molecules of other things. I'm assuming that you can, gold or silver or whatever. But water itself, that's how why it's fluid, and that's why it can't be compressed, and that's why there's so many things. Water is such a fascinating um, thing, right? But that's how we are. You can't be just one thing all the time. We we flip back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Um, and to actually ever become stable, uh, we would have to just stop being two things and become one thing. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but physics of water, fascinating stuff. Okay, so
I'm giggling at Carrie Palm's comment in the chat. So no powdered water. Yeah, the
no
freeze
powder
dried water
water.
industry is yet to take off. I think. Yeah,
That's right.
that's good. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah,
I gotta look at the comments. I
yeah.
haven't.
Well, I think yeah, you make a really good point there, Lynn. Because I mean, if you think about it, that nothing really can exist out of context with everything else. I've been thinking about something that my wife and I visited north of here when we were exploring this area as a possible place to live, 25 give or take years ago, um, and before we actually ended up here, at least currently. And the whole thing of one of the things that we explored was the Biosphere 2 facility, which is
Oh
north of
yeah.
Tucson. And it's kind of interesting because it's basically a failed attempt, at least how I look at it, at self-sufficiency. But what it succeeded in doing is showing that, in my mind anyway, is that interconnectedness uh, is and true um, true reliance on the and interdependence is really the only way that we can really survive. I mean, after I what I recall them, the tour that we went on, saying is that the attempt was to make this large enclosed facility that had solar and hydroponics and all these different things that were supposed to work together, but they quickly discovered that they couldn't really, you know, keep this thing going without supplies and whatnot from the outside world. I mean, in terms of energy, yeah, maybe the sun took care of a fair amount, but there was always, things that were needed from the outside. Well, I mean, that's kind of like your water stories. You can't really isolate one water molecule. Um, I mean, maybe you could theoretically, but the point is, trying to take it out of context is like saying, "Oh, I get what this masterpiece at the Louvre is, or some great museum by some Renaissance artist or whatever, and because I'm looking at 6 pixels, now out of the millions that comprise the image, it's like, wow, I really get it. Well, probably not. And but that's what we try to do, that we're looking at such a minuscule part of reality. There's another place I'm going to find it, and it's in section 10 in the manual. I think I can find it really quickly. That is got a paragraph that I think is so wonderful. Um, it's let's see, it's well, paragraph 3 is I think where it starts. Yeah, I'll just read a paragraph or so. This is section 10 in the manual for teachers, paragraph 3. I don't have the page number handy because I've got my book open to something else, but it begins, the aim of our curriculum, unlike the goal of the world's learning, is the recognition that judgment in the usual sense is impossible. This is not an opinion, but a fact. In order to judge anything rightly, one would have to be fully aware of an inconceivably wide range of things, past, present, and to come. One would have to recognize in advance all the effects of his judgments on everyone and everything involved in them in any way. And one would have to be certain that there is no distortion in his perception, so that his judgment would be wholly fair to everyone on whom it rests now and in the future. Who is in a position to do this? Who, except in grandiose fantasies, would claim this for himself? Well, I mean, that rhetorical question is, duh, all of us, we think we have things figured out. Elsewhere it says, retire now as your own teacher, for you were badly taught. And actually, two quotes strung together that Ken typically does. And then it says, remember how many times you thought you knew all the quote facts, unquote, you needed for judgment, and how wrong you were. Is there anyone who has not had this experience? Would you know how many times you merely thought you were right without ever realizing you're wrong? Why would you choose such an arbitrary basis for decision making? Wisdom is not judgment, it is the relinquishment of judgment. Make then but one more judgment. It is this: there is someone, capital S, with you whose, capital W, judgment is perfect. He does know all the facts, past, present, and to come. He does know all the effects of his judgment on everyone and everything involved in any way. And he is wholly fair to everyone, for there's no distortion in his perception. And of course, that's the Holy Spirit, which later on in the as for the rest section, it says, you know, trusting the Holy Spirit isn't just a good idea because of our inadequacies, our the abysmal failure of our judgments to try to, make a mental map of reality, even within the projection of our dream of reality, let alone the cause of it and the ego thought system. But if we can just realize, we've got everything backwards, inside out, and upside down, and we're like blind babies, trying to understand the world, or another favorite metaphor is, we're like amoebas crawling on the underside of a leaf at the bottom of a very dark, murky pond, and we come around the corner, start crawling on the upper side of the leaf where there's a little tiny bit of light filtering down from the top of the pond. And we say, wow, nirvana, I have it figured out now. I understand the cosmos. But,
That's it.
but
Yeah.
that's what we're doing all the time for the most part, and if I can just remember that and not laugh, derisively but gently at myself whenever I catch myself doing that. I think the course is, continuously lampooning the ego in that way. And actually, I probably mentioned before, I have a two or three blog posts on acimblog.com that if you put in lampoon in the search function, um, you were there with me in uh, Estes Park, Colorado, a decade or so ago when I gave this talk on, how the Holy Spirit lampoons the ego in the most gentle way possible. That it's like how absurd it is for us to think that we understand anything, because you know, is it,
Absolutely.
just one more thought, because I've been rambling, and that is
I
that's
know.
a sentence that I really like, that I find more and more helpful all the time is, you know, Son of God, you have not sinned, but you have been much mistaken. I just think that's such a helpful phrase.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And such a loving phrase too.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It's so gentle because it's saying, yeah, I can see why you've been doing this because, you're about as myopic as a electron microscope trying to fathom what really needs a James Webb Space Telescope to begin a, to begin to get a hint of the depth and breadth of things,
Yeah.
metaphorically.
How funny. Yeah, yeah, and that's true. And what you made me think of, remember Mr. Magoo?
Oh, of course. Yeah,
Oh,
that's a great
Magoo.
metaphor. Yeah, yeah. And yet he had the grace, I remember
Oh,
one
yeah.
cartoon sequence where he's managed to walk onto a construction elevator and a high-rise building that's just framed in with girders and columns, of steel, and he's he steps off of that structure onto a beam that's being held aloft by a derrick, which is spinning around, and then he steps off of it just at the right moment when another derrick holding another beam is just in position for his foot to rest on, and he keeps on walking, and then finally that derrick swings the beam around to where he walks onto something else where he's safe, but he's completely oblivious to the fact. And I think that's kind of the safety that the Holy Spirit provides for us. We have no idea what's really going on, but it's humorous to think that we understand anything. And I keep
I
forgetting
know.
that over and over. And that's why the course keeps reminding us over and over again.
Yep, yep. And it is it's like watching a baby, a toddler thinking they're driving the car when they're in the back seat with in the baby seat with the little driver steering wheel. That's we that's what we think we're doing. It's hilarious. So,
Is that
uh,
what Paul Simon meant by baby driver? Maybe not.
the driver, yeah. Oh my gosh. So let's see. Here we are. We left Israel for New York in September. As it turned out, it was a very timely exit, since it was only a few days before the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War. I arrived in New York without a place to live, let alone a job. For the first few days, I stayed in Bill's apartment until Father Michael arranged for me to stay at the Leo House, a Catholic hotel on West 23rd Street in Manhattan. I was to remain there for almost a year. A hiring freeze at Presbyterian Hospital made it impossible for me to get a job there, but since money was not an immediate concern, I was able to be up there as if I had a full-time position. It would not be for another year that a half-time position would become available to me, and that then provided me with the income I needed. In the interim, Father Michael had begun to refer a few nuns and priests to me for therapy, and before I knew it, I had a regular practice. Michael also arranged for some psychological testing to be done by us on candidates for religious orders. Helen, Bill, and I collaborated on these, and the money generated from the evaluations paid for the costs of the final typing of the course manuscript. And actually, only the text needed retyping and copying charges.
Hmm.
So he got odd jobs and part-time jobs.
Interesting, interesting. Huh. I'd forgotten this part of the story. And I'd also kind of forgotten the context that kind of relates to my personal dream figure story is in the fall of 73 when he's talking about. I was scheduled. I'd taken a year off school from my engineering curriculum at UC Davis, California, to go to record electronic music with a Los Angeles musician named Paul Beaver, who worked with another fellow named Bernie Krause, who I believe is still around. Anyway, they had done some electronic music recordings of their own, but also were work with in their studio, which had this huge warehouse full of both functional and defunct uh, musical instruments like old harpsichords and all kinds of funky stuff. Um, it was probably bigger than most people's houses, just this area that they had all these musical instruments in, and um, in the side room they had a Moog synthesizer and then a Hammond electric organ, and I was really nuts about synthesizers, so I found out about their their work through a None Such Guide to Electronic Music, and I had studied everything in the Moog synthesizer catalog that came out in '72, and I and I basically became friends with Paul through postal mail, and I said, and he invited me to down to a studio, and which I'd done, previously in this, about the time I was in college, and so we thought, well, gee, wouldn't it be cool to go record electronic music in the Great Pyramid? And because of the acoustics there, and prior to that, Paul Horn had released this is kind of a longish New Age aside, if you will, but I'm almost done. But anyway, we went. We would had both become impressed with Paul Horn's recording of the flute in the Taj Mahal. I was like, well, what's another iconic structure that might have interesting acoustics? And I remember I wrote a Fortran program on the Control Data 3400 in Livermore, California, in my high school programming class to figure out the resonant frequencies of all the different chambers and passageways, including what's called the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid, and it had some really interesting harmonic relationships. And but I'd gotten my shots and passport and all this stuff ready to go to Egypt, and that was my brother and sister had gone to Europe, and so my folks were nice enough to say, well, we'll fund your Egypt trip, as the equivalent kind of thing, and but it never materialized. I ended up working at a department store in Livermore and getting a pilot's license, which was fun. And then I went back finish my degree, or actually another couple of years of my degree um, the following year. But in the fall of '73, to make a long story a little shorter, um, the trip never materialized because of the Yom Kippur War. That was basically when Egypt and Israel really upped up their hostilities, and it was like not a good time to go to visit Egypt. In fact, it's 19 years later when I finally did go there with my now wife Nancy, and we got married in the island of Philae by a fellow named Greg Braden, who some of you might know. Anyway, yeah, we did go in the Great Pyramid, and I did take a little digital recorder and a microphone and recorded both of our toning inside what's called a sarcophagus, but it's really just a granite box inside of what's called the King's Chamber, but it really is not likely to have been a burial chamber because the funerary practice at the time was to bring the pharaoh in the granite box, um, and from the outside as in a funeral procession. But the dimensions of that granite box that's called a sarcophagus are larger than the opening to the room that's called the King's Chamber. So it would have had to be built in place while the pyramid was being built. So anyway, enough of that story. But but anyway, that whole thing about the Yom Kippur War is like, oh yeah, that's when Helen and Bill had just left right before that, and I was about to go there, which didn't happen because of that. So anyway, just a little fun aside. So
It's amazing, and thank you for that story, Bruce, because
sure,
yes, it's such a wonderful thing to think that, these are the times that we're living in. 1973 was when I was in Fort Collins, Colorado,
yeah.
and hanging out with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche
Oh
and
wow.
his
Huh.
folks, and what a time that was to be caught up in this spiritual delirium. It seemed like to me, when I think about it now, it was like such a powerful time such a powerful time for so much opening and awakening. Um, I just it's amazing to me that we're here at this point. We chose to come here now.
Yeah, it's not nothing by accident, nothing by chance, as Richard Bach would say.
You know, I feel so special, but I know
Well,
that
that's the trap, of course, to
uh,
to notice how, but because everyone's on a perfect path and a perfect trajectory to undoing the ego and returning home. And if we try to make a big deal out of our stories, um, we're out totally missing the point, right? And no
exactly.
story is better or worse than any other story because they all lead to the same place.
Exactly. And I'm not a special different person because we're all here. You know, that's you know the whole idea that we are all here all the time everywhere. That there was no Lynn then doing those things as there was no Bruce then doing those things.
Right,
You
right.
know, it was all of us just it's just the script. It's just the movie.
Hmm.
It's like saying, Jamie Lee Curtis is babysitting people on Halloween now. It it never happened. It was a movie. Even if you're watching the movie right now, it's not happening.
Hmm.
Oh
It
my,
was over long ago.
long
The
ago.
tiny mad AD, the whole Big Bang myth is everything from supernovas to black holes and quarks to quasars, right? It's all
Yeah.
one forgivable myth.
uh, yes, absolutely. So you want to read a bit
Sure, sure.
about
I'm going to start with we left for Israel. Did, did, did we already read we read that whole thing, that whole
yeah, we
paragraph, right?
did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
because that's how we got talking about
psychological training.
uh the
Listening.
okay. I'm getting ahead of the story.
Did we read the whole that whole paragraph?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So it's just that one last paragraph in chapter 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or chapter 11 rather. Now we're about ready to read chapter 12. So, Ken continues, but I'm getting ahead of the story, which awaits another chapter. I recall that as we landed in New York, I was feeling that I was about to embark on a journey whose direction I could not begin to understand, one which would take me places that at that point I was probably better off not knowing about. I had had hints in Israel of the ambivalent nature of Helen and Bill's relationship, not to mention during those 10 weeks in the late spring and early summer when I was in New York. But it was not till now, when we would be together almost all of the time, that the full extent of this ambivalence would become clear to me. Well, once again, we're all becoming aware of the full extent of our own ambivalence and resistance and wishy-washiness of trying to make two thought systems work when only one of them is real and only one of them can work, right? I shall return to Helen and Bill's special and holy relationship in chapter 13 after the following chapter, which discusses Helen's and my editing of the course. And then there's a footnote that I'm seeing on your screen that for some reason I don't see on mine. It says, for a brief description of the course's understanding of special and holy relationships, the reader may consult the appendix. Right. Okay. So that brings us to page 359 or chapter 12 about the editing, which
Attitude.
synchronistically, I just made a blog post, which I haven't, uh, you know, I'm still waiting for the person I interviewed to review it, so I'm not going to announce it, but it will soon. I'm sure I'll get some feedback on that. But I put a link to the editing history of the course in that post, and so this is very appropriate that we're reading this chapter. And I think this chapter may be, if not tremendous overlap, may actually be from what Ken wrote here. Um, well, the long page on the ACIM.org website, the Foundation for Inner Peace website, is the editing history, which I will look up and put in the chat.
Oh, good.
Is probably very much overlapping and and congruent with what we're about to read in chapter 12.
Well, that's good. And yeah, it's really wonderful for people to to read that and to understand what happened during the editing, because there's so many things flying about that have to do with accusations of all sorts of things happening during this editing time. So and of course, you know that's that's for a purpose too,
Right.
that we would have these conflicts and wonder about things. But
Yeah. And
yeah,
and as Ken points out very aptly, you know, if you think about all the objections that people have, including his involvement with the editing, which is really pretty minimal in terms of the content. It was mostly just section and chapter titles and they added the annotation. The content was really the same. And I think, as Ken very appropriately points out, is the whole point of the course is to correct our misunderstanding where it is, which is the faulty choice for the ego thought system. And it's never about the form. It's never about, you know, that crossing the T's and dotting the I's and all that. Because I mean, people can read all the different versions of the course that have come out with, the Pearly and the and
Barkley and
all probably more of those than I do because I really haven't studied any of them in any significance at all. But um, but the whole point is if you ignore the contents that's the same in all of them, in order to emphasize what's different, we're making the exact same thing that the ego likes to do with everything. It's basically saying, ignore the sameness of our intrinsic nature, and at that expense, raise to prominence and as a call to battle to fight over the differences on the level of form. Well, that's ego's goal for everything, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we fall into it so quickly and easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've fallen into it many times, and it's
Uh-huh.
like,
Oh yeah.
holy cow, here I am again. You know,
And just notice how we do it with political figures and and billionaires and whoever crosses the digital screens of our modern world, or whoever crosses our path on the level of form, in our tiny little local dream worlds, whether it's a family member or a coworker or a driver on the road or a medical authority that we hope would help us more to make our bodies immortal, whatever whatever
well,
the issue du jour is, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's hilarious. And we just have to keep remembering over and over and over, this is a dream. I'm dreaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is a story of the editing in the dream. And and again, because we all come from a different point of view, our perception is different no matter, how if we lived with a person 365 days, 7 days a week, night and day, we would never have the same perception as they do.
Right.
You may be standing right next to them for the entire time and never have the same perception as them. So
Identical twins, same story, right?
yeah, exactly. So I'll just read. We have about 15 minutes
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
No, about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So I'll
Mhm.
just start this. Okay. Chapter 12, The Editing, 1973 through 1975. I completed my first reading of A Course in Miracles during the 10 weeks I spent back in the States in 1973. I read a copy of Helen's second retyping, at least of the text, which was presented to Hugh Lynn Casey, and thus it was named by us, as mentioned earlier, the Hugh Lynn version. The text, incidentally, was divided at the time into 4 volumes, corresponding to the 4 thesis binders Bill had bought to house the manuscript. I read the text, workbook, and manual straight through, and then began the text again when I returned to Israel. Helen, Bill, and I agreed to do the workbook together, but only on Helen's condition that we start with lesson 51, the beginning of the review for the first 50 lessons. Helen never liked the first 50 lessons, as was discussed in part 2. I completed my second reading of the 3 books, which I did much more slowly, sometime after our return to New York. Shortly afterwards, I began again, partially in preparation for a glossary index for the course, something I thought would be useful. As it turned out, however, I did not seriously begin work on that book until 1977, when we were all in England, and even then it was not to be completed for another 5 years. At any rate, I was reading the text again, and very carefully at this point. I commented to Helen and Bill that I thought the manuscript needed some additional editing. Some of the personal and professional material still remained and seemed inappropriate for a published edition. The first 4 chapters did not read well at all, in large part because the deleted personal material left gaps um, in the remaining text and thus required minor word additions to smooth the transition. Also, some of the divisions in the material appeared arbitrary to me, and many of the section and chapter titles did not really coincide with the material. And then in parentheses, he says, I later learned that Helen's usual methodology was to draw the section title from its opening lines, even if the subsequent material went to in a different direction.
Hmm.
Finally, the paragraphing, punctuation, and capitalization were not only idiosyncratic, but notoriously inconsistent.
Mhm.
Which I guess, because Jesus did not say period, question mark, uh, parentheses, those were all things that Jesus had to put in there. Uh,
Hyphen, semicolon. That's something that bugs one of the people that in a study group that I attend frequently, and we laugh about it now, but it used to annoy him tremendously.
yeah, and yeah, if you are really into editing or knowing the rules of grammar, you know,
Grammar Nazis to the rescue.
I know it, man. But Helen was not. I mean, she had a very good sense of how things should be. That's for sure.
Mhm.
But anyway, so Ken is talking about how, uh, he just kind of said, well, I think things could read a little smoother here, and have a little bit better coherence. And I'm sure that that was not just an ego personal thought. I'm sure that the Holy Spirit had something to do with that for sure. So let's see here. So let's continue. Helen and Bill agreed that it did need a final run through. As Bill lacked the patience and attention to detail that was needed for such a task, we decided that Helen and I should go through it together. And so we did, never realizing just how long it would take us to complete the editing. Well, I earlier quoted Helen's statement that she had come to think of A Course in Miracles as her life's work, and she approached the editing project with real dedication. She and I meticulously went over every word to be sure that the final manuscript was right. And you know what's really so funny, Bruce? I'm a compulsive editor also, and I have found so many grammatical errors in the course. I'm like, I can't believe I can't believe that, she left this in here. And it's not big glaring errors, but they're ones that if you know the rules of grammar, you would know that, that was not the correct the way to do it.
And
But
and as Ken explains, at least partly in defense, if you will, of some of those, a lot of it was done to preserve the meter of the iambic pentameter, the 10 syllable, uh, you know, rhythm of the course's prose, the Shakespearean blank verse, and so things, even words were kind of modified slightly to fit that iambic pentameter, which Helen loved. She was a huge fan of Shakespeare, so some of it is done that way. Also, um, there, that style of writing uses some archaic phrasings and so forth. And that's another, kind of related factor to that as well. A lot of times, because I'll copy and paste sections from the course and I use a spell grammar check called Grammarly, and it'll flag a lot of things. In fact, it's very rare that when I post something on ACIM blog that it doesn't find if I post, you know, a half a dozen quotes from the FIP edition, which is obviously the most up to date, you know, polished version as far as the, you know, what the Helen intended. Um, there's still, you know, errors that the Grammarly will flag, and yet
Mhm.
I just ignore them. I just basically say, you know, just learn that this is the right way. Basically, that's what I tell
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
software, because that's I don't need to correct that. Now, having said that, Bob Rosenthal, before he passed, sent me a copy of from the FIP of some of the proposed changes to what would become a fourth edition of the course. I don't know if they've gone any further with that. There was like, oh, I don't know, 40 or 50, mostly very minor edits, and they all look good to me. Um, but I have no idea how many of those were, because I wasn't kind of thinking about that. But, you know, we're kind of keeping the meter of the iambic pentameter or the Shakespearean blank verse style or anything, you know, that kind of stuff. But again, you know, if I'm myopically got my nose, you know, an inch from the book, and I'm, you know, uh, poring over and agonizing over all the minutia and forgetting to, you know, read the course as an epic poem, as Ken said. I mean, you don't ask for poetry to be grammar perfect. In fact, like E. E. Cummings, you know, didn't even capitalize the letters of his name, and and
Yeah.
yet, and yet, you know, would you condemn him for that? You know, it's like, well, I don't know. It's just I think it's just so easy to get nitpicky about the minutia and not see the forest for the trees. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And actually, if in reality, uh, there is no right way of any of it. It's all
right.
made up. All the words are made up. All the rules are made up. It's all made up.
Yep.
So, you know, and you're right. You know, over the centuries, the rules have changed dramatically
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
continue to change. You know, our
right.
language now, you know, the language that we experience here in even of English, which you know we would think would have some sort of a consistency to it. No, you know, you read
But no.
Shakespeare or Chaucer or something, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I see we're running out of time, so I'm going to draw a line under where we left off, and then look forward to continuing the conversation next week. So
Absolutely.
have a peaceful week, all, and looking forward to hands in the air to Dev and Rafi and all. Um, have a peaceful week, and look forward to picking up where we left off. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Bruce. I love you, brother, and
Likewise.
we will talk to you next week.
Yeah,
Bye.
looking forward to it.